You open the fridge, grab a carton of eggs, and there it is. A little stamped date staring back at you. Best by, sell by, use by, expires on. For most of us, that date feels like a hard deadline, a line in the sand between safe to eat and throw it out now. But have you ever wondered where these dates actually came from, what they're supposed to mean, and why almost none of them are regulated the way you'd expect? In this episode of The Lost History of Everyday Things, let's dig into the surprisingly recent, surprisingly unscientific history behind the labels we trust every single day. If you enjoy this video, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification icon. If you have topics you want to see covered in future episodes, please leave them in the comments. I'll be honest, I used to think that all food went bad on the exact expiration date. Like clockwork, as if some invisible switch flipped at midnight and turned a perfectly good yogurt into a biohazard. I remember tossing things the moment the date passed. No sniffing, no second guessing, just straight into the trash. It felt responsible. It felt safe. It turns out it was mostly just wasteful. And I wasn't alone in thinking that way, because the labels themselves were never designed to communicate what most of us assumed they meant. Unlike the 6-foot burial rule, which stretches back centuries, food date labeling is a remarkably modern invention. Before the 20th century, people relied on their senses. They smelled the milk, looked at the color of the meat, checked for mold, and trusted experience passed down through generations. Refrigeration wasn't widespread. Food was often bought fresh and consumed quickly. And the idea of a printed date determining a food's fate simply didn't exist. That began to change in the 1970s in the United States, as supermarkets grew larger, supply chains grew longer, and consumers grew more distant from the farms and producers that made their food. People wanted reassurance, some kind of signal that told them a product was still good, especially as packaged and processed foods became a bigger part of the average diet. So manufacturers started stamping dates on packages. But here's the twist that surprised me the most, and honestly changed how I look at every label in my kitchen. These dates were never primarily about safety. They were about quality. A best by date is the manufacturer's estimate of when a product will taste, look, and perform at its peak, not the moment it becomes dangerous. Potato chips might go a little stale. Crackers might lose their crunch. A best by date on canned soup doesn't mean the soup spoils overnight. It just means the company can't guarantee the same flavor and texture after that point. I never realized there was a difference between an expiration date and a best by date until I actually looked into it. And honestly, that gap in understanding is incredibly common. Most people, myself included for a long time, treat every date on every label as the same kind of warning. But manufacturers use a whole handful of different phrases, and each one is technically supposed to mean something slightly different. Sell by is aimed at the store, not the shopper. It tells retailers how long to display a product for sale, giving the seller a buffer to move inventory while leaving the buyer some time to use it at home. Best by, or best if used by, refers to peak quality, as mentioned, and is really a flavor and freshness marker rather than a safety cutoff. Use by is the closest thing to an actual safety-oriented date, most often found on perishable items like deli meat or fresh dairy, though even this is frequently set conservatively by the manufacturer to protect their reputation, rather than because the food becomes hazardous the instant the date passes. And then there's freeze by, a lesser-known label suggesting the window during which a product should be frozen to preserve its best quality. Here's the part that genuinely surprised me while researching this. In the United States, there is no federal law requiring most food products to carry any of these dates at all, with one major exception: infant formula, which does have federally mandated use-by dating because babies are especially vulnerable to nutrient degradation and spoilage. Everything else is largely left to individual states, and even then, regulations vary wildly. Some states require certain dates on certain products. Others leave it almost entirely up to the manufacturer's discretion. This patchwork system means the same product might be labeled differently depending on where it's sold, and the wording itself, whether it says best by, sell by, or use by, might mean something completely different from one company to the next, because there's no universal standard defining these terms. This lack of standardization has real consequences, and not just confusion in the kitchen. Studies have shown that a significant portion of household food waste in developed countries comes directly from people misreading or over-trusting these labels. If a date feels official, printed in neat black lettering on a carton or a can, it's easy to treat it like gospel rather than what it usually is. A rough, conservative estimate designed more to protect a brand's reputation for freshness than to warn you of danger. Millions of tons of perfectly edible food get thrown away every year in part because shoppers assume a past date means spoiled food, when in reality, many products remain safe and enjoyable well beyond the printed date, especially shelf-stable goods like pasta, rice, canned vegetables, and dry beans. Of course, this doesn't mean every date is meaningless or that caution should be thrown out the window. Highly perishable foods, especially those associated with bacteria like Listeria or Salmonella, deserve real respect for their labeling. Deli meats, soft cheeses, raw poultry, and ready-to-eat refrigerated meals are exactly the kinds of products where use-by dates carry more weight because the risk of foodborne illness climbs the longer these items sit past their intended window. The trick, and the thing so many of us were never taught, is learning which category a food falls into. A best-by date on crackers is a suggestion. A use-by date on raw chicken is much closer to a rule. Interestingly, food safety experts and organizations like the USDA have pushed in recent years to simplify this confusing landscape. There's been a growing movement to standardize labeling around just two phrases: best if used by, to indicate quality, and use by, to indicate safety, phasing out the ambiguous sell-by language that was never meant for consumers in the first place. The goal is to cut down on the guesswork, reduce unnecessary food waste, and help people make decisions based on actual risk, rather than a vague sense of unease every time a date passes. Technology is starting to play a role here too. Smart packaging with time-temperature indicators can now change color as a product ages or is exposed to unsafe conditions, giving a far more accurate picture than a static printed date ever could. Some companies are experimenting with QR codes that link to real-time freshness data, tracking a product from the moment it's packaged to the moment it lands in your cart. Apps have popped up that let people scan barcodes and get science-based guidance on how long a food is actually likely to remain safe, cutting through the noise of a dozen slightly different label phrases. These innovations echo a broader theme we've seen again and again on this channel. As we understand a process more deeply, whether it's burial depth or food safety, our practices tend to shift away from rigid, one-size-fits-all rules and toward more nuanced, individualized approaches. Despite all this, old habits and misconceptions still run deep. Plenty of people still believe that any date on a package is a hard safety deadline set by some government agency, when in most cases, it's simply a quality estimate chosen internally by the manufacturer. Others assume that if something smells and looks fine, the date doesn't matter at all, which can be risky advice for high-hazard foods where bacteria aren't always detectable by smell or appearance. The truth sits somewhere in the middle, and it depends heavily on the type of food, how it was stored, and which kind of date is actually printed on the label. Ultimately, the story of expiration dates is a story about a system built quickly to solve a modern problem: communication between distant manufacturers and increasingly disconnected consumers, without much regulation or consistency guiding how it was built. It's a mix of good intentions, corporate caution, patchwork state laws, and a whole lot of consumer misunderstanding along the way. And honestly, learning the real meaning behind these labels changed the way I shop and the way I use up what's already in my kitchen. I check dates differently now. I ask what kind of date it actually is before deciding whether something needs to go. So the next time you're standing in front of an open fridge, staring down a date that just passed, you'll know the story behind it. And maybe you'll pause before tossing something that's probably still perfectly fine. As with so many things we take for granted, it's less about a strict rule handed down from on high, and more about history, marketing, caution, and the evolving relationship between the food we eat and the people trying to sell it to us. Thank you for watching this episode. If you have suggestions for our next videos, please share them in the comments below. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the lost history of everyday things. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more stories that surprise us with their origins, truths, and stories passed down through generations.